Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. The drive from Des Moines back to Dayton felt endless, even though it was only 5 hours on I-35 and I-70. 4 months of living in Iowa farm country, analyzing corn futures and processing facilities, and now I was heading home for what I knew would be a brutal meeting with the head of our agricultural commodities trading desk. The drive didn't bother me much. What worried me was anticipating what I'd find at home. I arrived in Dayton just after 8:30 a.m. and checked into the Marriott downtown. I'd booked the room the night before, so it was ready immediately. After dropping my bags, I hit the hotel gym. 30 minutes of weights, 30 on the treadmill, then a scalding shower followed by ice-cold water until my teeth chattered. Anyone will tell you that April in Ohio can't be called warm, but I endured it until I was fully awake. At the hotel restaurant, I devoured a proper breakfast: pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, all drowned in maple syrup, washed down with 4 cups of coffee. After 4 months of small-town Iowa diners, I'd missed decent hotel food. Then I headed to Agricor Financial on 3rd Street, where my 10:30 appointment waited. The elevator took me to the 8th floor, where the executive suites were located. I walked through the polished lobby, showed my ID, and was escorted to a small conference room to wait. That's how they wanted to play it. 2 cameras covered opposite corners of the room. I was sure they were watching. I tossed my leather briefcase onto the mahogany table and walked to the window, staring down at the street below. They left me there for exactly 17 minutes. I know because I counted every second. During my years working with agricultural futures and spending time in farming communities across the Midwest, I'd learned a thing or two about patience and showing no weakness, no matter what. Vincent Rodriguez, VP of Agricultural Commodities Trading, walked in followed by David Hoffman, our corporate attorney. If it had been just Vincent, this would have turned into a problem-solving session. If it had been David alone, it would have been about covering the company's legal exposure. But both of them together, someone was getting fired, and that someone was me. Marcus. Vincent didn't offer a handshake. He gestured to a chair as they sat across from me. Battle lines drawn. What the hell happened in Iowa? It wasn't really a question. We sent you there to provide stability for the junior traders, and instead you approved the purchase of $300 million worth of stock in a startup organic corn processing company with no track record other than their claim it's revolutionary. Yes, I said simply. Yes. His face turned from ruddy to purple, a vein protruding on his forehead. Care to elaborate? Look, Vincent, it's all in my report. The management team has nearly 200 years of combined experience in sustainable agriculture. The processing technology is 50 years in development, and those numbers have been verified by Deloitte and KPMG. Traditional corn farming has hit its sustainability ceiling, and their organic processing facility represents the future of agricultural commodities. Then why is their share price falling? He exploded. They went public at $17 and they're trading at $9.55. He tapped his finger on the table aggressively. And what did you do? You bought more. Yes, because there will be a rebound. When the price reaches $25, as my analysis forecasts, we'll have cost averaged our position. That's a potential profit of $267 million, almost 90% return. He didn't see the bigger picture. Vincent, we own 25% of all shares. We're the largest single shareholder. Of a failing company, he shouted, spittle flying. It's failing because industrial agriculture lobbyists are short-selling to either sink the company, since it threatens their monopolies, or buy it for pennies and control the organic processing market. I leaned forward. We need the courage to hold our ground. This isn't the crazy 80s and 90s, Marcus. We need confidence and positive risk ratios. He shook his head. Anyway, it's not just my decision now. The board approved my recommendation. You're out. David's turn to handle the severance. 3 months' salary, almost 30 days of accrued vacation, plus they'd cash out my stock options at current price. All told, I'd walk away with nearly $800,000, but with a ruined reputation and zero prospects in agricultural trading. By 2 p.m., I'd signed all the forms, rolled my 17-year 401k into an IRA, turned in company materials including my laptop, and been escorted out. I stood on the sidewalk with an empty briefcase, feeling like my head might explode. Back at the hotel, I grabbed a whiskey mini from the bar, mixed it with 7-Up over ice, blasphemy, I know, and sat down to consider my options. At 42, I was too young to retire but maybe too old to start over. There was only one option left, and it was a massive gamble. But if I didn't have the courage, how could I expect others to? I went shopping. An hour later, I returned with a new laptop, downloaded trading software, and got to work. I plugged in a flash drive with all my Iowa transactions, which I'd thoughtfully kept separate from company files. I checked our savings, $50,000. My personal investment accounts held $250,000 each, but required 24-hour notice for withdrawal. I initiated the transfers, then calculated that with my severance payments, I'd have over $1.2 million. Within 2 days, I transferred almost everything into an offshore trading account called Blue Sky International. By 9 p.m., I ordered room service and pulled out my phone. It had been off for over 36 hours, the longest in years. I considered turning it on but was mentally exhausted. Instead, I lay on the bed watching the news until jet lag from the early morning drive caught up with me. The next morning, my internal clock woke me early. Over coffee, I finally turned on my phone. It exploded with messages. Dad, Mom is having a breakdown. From Tyler and Emma. What's going on with Rebecca? From my father. Happy birthday and why aren't you answering? From Rebecca's parents. Happy birthday, Dad. From Tyler and Emma. Happy birthday and good luck, Marcus. From my Iowa team. Happy birthday, son. From Dad. Happy birthday, little brother. From my sister Georgia. More calls followed from Tyler, explaining Mom was crying but had calmed down. No calls from Rebecca. No birthday greetings. No explanations. It was like I didn't exist. I caught the 10:30 flight from Columbus to Dayton and found my house in chaos. The kids had left games, soda cans, and plates throughout the living room. The kitchen was worse, sink clogged with unwashed dishes, dishwasher overflowing, trash can spilling over. In the laundry room, clothes lay unwashed for what seemed like weeks. I spent 3 hours cleaning, doing laundry, vacuuming, and restoring order. 2 empty wine bottles and stemmed glasses sat in the living room, both with different shades of lipstick. Our bedroom looked like it hadn't been changed in weeks. I put on fresh sheets and opened windows to air it out. Finally, I headed to my office to check the markets. The Iowa Organic Processing Company was down to $9.30, nearly 2 points for the day. We'll see what kind of resolve I have once my money clears and I can enter the market. I called my dad. Mom died 5 years ago from breast cancer, so we discussed Rebecca. He said she'd seemed sad and depressed the last 2 weeks, heartbroken for no apparent reason. Strange. I checked our bank transactions, nothing unusual. Our home phone messages held nothing unexpected either. After folding clothes, I decided to see what we had for dinner. The answer was nothing much. I went to the garage, reconnected my Audi A6 battery, and drove to the local supermarket. I returned with groceries to make Thai green curry with jasmine rice boiled in coconut milk and ginger, chicken stir-fried with vegetables, Asian basil, and fresh green chilies, seasoned with curry paste, lime, and fish sauce. I was halfway through cooking when Rebecca's car pulled into the driveway. The kids, spotting my car, ran inside screaming, "Daddy's home!" I hugged them both simultaneously, kissing them repeatedly, telling them how much I'd missed them. Tears came to my eyes as Emma sobbed in my arms, her whole body shaking. Tyler was more subdued, befitting his almost teenage status. When I looked up, Rebecca was watching us, watching me. There was a strange, almost wistful expression in her eyes, and tears rolled down her cheek. She waited until I stood up, then pulled me close and kissed me gently on the lips. "Welcome home, Marcus." There wasn't much enthusiasm in her words, and her body language suggested sadness or discomfort. Her eyes didn't linger on me long. That smells nice," she sniffed. "What is it?" "Thai green curry," Tyler and Emma exclaimed, looking at me with incomprehension. I don't know what it is, Dad, but it smells really good. Tyler smiled, hugging me again while Emma clung to my neck with her legs off the ground. You two go clean up for dinner, Rebecca ordered. You'll have plenty of time with your father afterward. She came over and gave me a gentle hug and kiss on the cheek. You look exhausted, Marcus. She assessed my condition visually. How come you're back so soon? I thought you'd be there another 8 weeks. Turns out the bosses didn't like some of my initiatives, I admitted. I got fired. She flushed. Then her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Well, it's... She fumbled for words. Unfortunately, she managed to mutter. We'll figure something out. But what about you? I stared at this almost stranger standing in front of me. I'd been married for 15 years, and she was acting more like an acquaintance than my wife. Are you okay? Her eyes clouded over, but she blinked and squared her shoulders. It's work. She tried to smile, but it didn't quite work. The market's down. That wasn't what I'd heard. There are changes happening at Brennan Insurance. There's pressure on everyone. She spread her arms wide to show how overwhelming it was. At this point, the kids came downstairs, rushed back to me. We'll talk later, she said, turning toward the kitchen. We gathered for our first family meal in 4 months. I served each plate, poured Rebecca a cool California white wine. Tyler got his Mountain Dew, and Emma asked for water. As we ate, I told the kids stories about Iowa team-building exercises including go-kart racing, indoor golf, laser tag, and paintball. It was all great fun. After emptying their plates, Tyler and Emma disappeared together, returning with smiles and a wrapped present. Happy birthday, Dad! Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth. I kissed my children as she emitted, Oh my God! I'm so sorry, Marcus. I totally forgot. I was about to remind her that I'd given her gold diamond earrings for her birthday, but instead focused on the kids. I opened my present, a Band of Brothers DVD set. I'd always said I wanted to own the complete series. I kissed them again, their wide smiles matching mine. I'll get you a present tomorrow, Marcus. Rebecca was embarrassed and remorseful. I waved her away. You don't have to. Being home with my family is all the present I need. Tyler and Emma threw themselves into my arms again with cries of, Love you, Daddy. We sat talking for over an hour, but eventually they had to do homework while Rebecca and I cleaned the kitchen. What's going on with you, Rebecca? You're not the person I know. She jerked her hand sharply as if to stop me. Then her shoulders slumped. I don't know, Marcus. I guess I'm depressed. You travel so much, for weeks at a time. Last time was too long. She looked me in the eye. You're not here. We hardly live the same life. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I feel lost. I reached out and wrapped her in a tight hug. She resisted at first but then gave in, letting me hold her as she sobbed softly. We stayed like that for a while. I wanted more. I wanted to solve the problem, but she wouldn't let me know what she needed beyond being held. She was right, though. Over the past 6 years since I'd been promoted to senior trader, I'd found myself constantly troubleshooting for inexperienced teams across the Midwest. We'd discussed it and agreed we'd make sacrifices with the ultimate goal of both retiring when I turned 50. She gently pulled away and suggested I spend time with the kids. I started with Emma going over her homework, then did the same with Tyler. After tucking Emma into bed and kissing her goodnight, I walked over to Tyler. Mom's not okay, Dad, he said with concern. She's been crying and hardly doing anything around the house. She even forgot your birthday. He looked toward the door to ensure we weren't overheard. I think she's having a breakdown. There were tears in his eyes. Please fix it, Dad. I nodded, though I had no idea what was going on or how to handle it. As I walked downstairs, I heard her talking quietly on the phone. She heard or saw me coming and hung up quickly. Who was that? I raised an eyebrow. One of the girls from the office, she said, ending the conversation. We looked at each other. She didn't back down an inch. Whatever was bothering her, she wasn't going to discuss it. But she looked angry at me and trying to hide it. I decided it was a much more serious problem, but fatigue was kicking in again. It was 9:30 when I went to my office and checked the Chicago Mercantile Exchange futures. The Iowa company was trading at $9.90 in after-hours trading, up slightly. I went upstairs and waited for Rebecca to finish in the bathroom. She washed her face, brushed her teeth and hair, then walked into the bedroom wearing an oversized t-shirt as she often did. I cleaned up, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. I reached for her and she tensed momentarily, then pressed herself against me. "Please just hold me," she whispered in a thin voice. I held her for a long time. This wasn't the woman I knew. Something was fundamentally wrong. Had I been away too long? Was the separation too hard? Had she fallen out of love with me? Fallen in love with someone else? And then I had a terrible thought. What if she was sick? What if it was a serious disease and she didn't know how to tell me? All these thoughts swirled endlessly, but finally fatigue and the emotions of the last 2 days took their toll, and I fell into heavy sleep. I woke at 4:30 a.m., still feeling tired and sick. I decided to go for a run, promising myself to buy melatonin to reset my sleep schedule. I was on the road for about an hour, and when I returned, I found Rebecca gone with a short note asking me to feed the kids breakfast and drive them to school. It was still early, so I checked my bank account. The money from Agricor had cleared, and I transferred it to my offshore account. The Iowa shares weren't exactly in freefall, but they were on a downward escalator, trading at $8.99. I was faced with a choice: fix my marriage or fix my financial future. Was it possible to do both? I spent as much time as I could with Tyler and Emma, asking general questions about what they'd done during the months I was gone. The answer was nothing much, except for some activities with Mom's boss, Richard Brennan, and his daughter Sophia. They'd played miniature golf, gone to movies and dinners. Emma didn't notice anything unusual, but Tyler must have seen my expression and jumped in. "He was always with his daughter, Dad," he defended. "Sophia always said Mom was such a big part of the company. Like we were all one big happy family." Emma nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Aunt Sophia was always with us." I smiled and told them I was glad they hadn't stayed home bored while I was gone. But now I was back. Summer was approaching, and I wanted us to go on vacation and make the most of it. They nodded approvingly, and I hugged and kissed them again. I drove them to school, then called a few friends to arrange morning meetings. Then I called Frank Morrison, my old mentor. He was my manager when I first came to the trading floor, teaching me market trends no computer program could reveal. "Everything is driven by greed and fear," he told me repeatedly. We talked for a while. He still lived in Chicago, running a small registered brokerage for select clients. We discussed my credentials. I was SEC registered, a FINRA member, registered with the Ohio Securities Authority, and had signed AML compliance documents. We agreed I'd send him an electronic copy of the Iowa company prospectus for discussion later that day. I stopped by Walgreens across from Miami Valley Hospital on my way to my first appointment. I was leaving with melatonin and vitamins when I noticed Rebecca and Sophia Brennan coming out of the hospital. They were holding onto each other, looking like two women bound together by shared grief. I discreetly watched as they walked with heads down and shoulders bowed, bereft of hope. They climbed into a waiting Uber and disappeared into traffic. What the hell was that? I ran through all the possibilities swirling in my head since the previous evening, but nothing made sense. Was my wife sick and hiding it from me? Was Sophia sick? They looked grief-stricken and clinging to each other, but not sick. Neither looked ill. Maybe it was a mutual acquaintance. They looked too emotionally invested to be mere acquaintances. A friend? More than a friend? A lover? Quite possibly. But a mutual lover? My mind insisted they were in love with each other. But that wasn't it either. So I did the rational thing under the circumstances and went to my meeting. I discussed the possibility of investing in the Iowa company, leaving nothing out, including getting fired. At the first meeting, Julian Hayes said he'd contact me after discussing it with his investment club. The second meeting was with Aaron Goldstein, an old-fashioned retailer with serious money. He liked the idea immediately and, after spending time on his computer moving money around, agreed to transfer $10 million to my trading account once paperwork was completed. Over coffee at Starbucks on 5th Street, Frank called. He liked the prospectus and had interested investors. We agreed on a sliding commission structure. Higher yields meant higher percentages. I called my dad and discussed the Iowa opportunity. He wanted to invest $100,000 and would wire the money the next day. Then I discussed Rebecca's situation with him. He fell silent, and I mentally pictured him scratching his head. Dad's reasoning was slow and methodical. He worked as a risk analyst for one of the state's major insurance companies. When he responded, it was with concern. Her behavior resembles a woman in mourning. Well, she wasn't mourning her parents. They were disgustingly healthy in Arizona, apparently loving the warm, dry climate. She had no siblings, and her few cousins were scattered across the country, almost strangers. We talked longer while I questioned his thoughts, and finally I had to agree with him. He signed off, but not before giving me the number of a private investigator whose services his company regularly used for insurance fraud cases. I went home, called my contacts in Iowa to get sentiment updates, and recreated the risk assessment for the corn processing company. It turned out virtually identical to my original report. The numbers were sound, management was solid, the project was promising, but the decisive factor was that all management team members had invested their own money. They weren't just in the game, they were betting their future on success. Everything was ready. All that remained was waiting for markets to open, and I'd start trading. While I waited, I called the private investigator. His name was Detective James Mitchell, and I found his LinkedIn profile and small website under Mitchell Investigative Services. No pictures of him. When I called, he spoke with a slow, measured accent. I got the feeling he spoke that way deliberately because his mind was sharp and his questions were insightful. He asked for a $5,000 advance and said that since my father had referred so many cases over the years, he'd start the next day. With everything ready, I began drinking coffee, waiting for time to pass. My nervous energy peaked. Tyler and Emma came home late from sports practice, and I spent as much time with them as possible, but explained I had important business that night. Rebecca arrived looking tired but more determined than the previous evening. "I bought Chinese food on the way home," she announced, walking into my office and kissing me on the cheek. "Are you working?" "Hi, Becca." No affectionate words from her, so I didn't respond either. "I wish we could eat as a family, but I have to work tonight starting around 7. "Okay, that's fine, I guess," she said uncertainly. "I have a present for your birthday." She held out a small gift-wrapped package. The card read, "Happy birthday, Marcus. Love, Rebecca." I'd sent more personalized cards to distant relatives. Inside was a bottle of Hugo Boss aftershave. I thanked her, and she leaned over to kiss my lips dryly. I could have been a distant cousin. We ate as a family. Tyler and Emma talked about their day. Rebecca didn't say much. We discussed changes during my absence. Tyler complained that the old skate park was closed and there was less for teenagers to do in town. Then Emma said she thought it was good that Mr. Brennan had converted a house into a shelter for troubled teens. I turned to Rebecca with a raised eyebrow. "Well, yeah, I may have mentioned it," she admitted. "Richard wants to establish a community service project, and this is his way of doing it." She was superficial with details, and I sensed she was holding back. "I'm surprised. I didn't know Brennan was into that sort of thing." I really was surprised. I thought he was more the country club type. His wife Linda started doing it while she was alive, and he continued after she died. She informed me somewhat smugly, or was it something else I couldn't identify? He often used empty houses he owned, but now he wants to convert one into a permanent facility. "Why not?" She almost pounced on me. "It's a great cause and much needed. Doesn't seem like the city or state does much. A lot of these teenagers end up on the street." She wanted to continue but stopped when she noticed young ears at the table. I glanced at Tyler and Emma, nodding toward the door, and they withdrew to give Rebecca and me a chance for adult conversation. "Why now?" "That's what I meant." I looked at her intently. There was something about it, something she wasn't saying. Her face became impassive, and something flashed in her eyes. "Now the opportunity has presented itself." She nodded, as if confirming her words' rightness. "Ah, good. That certainly sounds like a great idea. Dayton could sure use it, I said, smiling at her. She smiled back as we both got up to clear the remaining food. I tried to keep a pleasant expression and not frown. She had lied to me, maybe not about everything, but she had good reason now. This wasn't speculation anymore. Her body language suggested she knew much more, and it had something to do with the personal. I helped clean up, took out trash, and told her I was going to work in my office. It was still an hour before Asian markets opened, so I sat at my desk and thought about the situation. I thought about my marriage, trying to maintain sanity and not release the deeply buried pain threatening to consume me. I knew if I gave up now, I wouldn't be able to do what needed to be done. At the same time, I realized if I held the pain back, it would likely get worse. I wondered how we'd gotten to this point. Rebecca and I had been compatible in almost every way. We agreed on where to live, how to spend money, vacation plans, when to have children and how many. We had a good life. To be fair, the last few years had been difficult because of my traveling, but usually we made plans before I returned, and after I returned we invariably had a mini honeymoon. But not this time. I thought we were on the same page, but we weren't. It made me angry. Iowa and the Midwest were full of women looking for successful men, some for experience, some because most traders held lucrative positions and had more to offer than local counterparts. Some simply saw it as a ticket to better opportunities. I was approached daily in the office, on the street, in restaurants, especially in bars and clubs. Many of my colleagues dated local women, some even setting them up in apartments. Personally, I found this practice disgusting and exploitative, but no one cared about my opinion. The only reason I thought about it was that 10 times a week I turned down attractive women because I was married. More than that, I was married to a woman I loved and thought loved me back. But her behavior made me wonder if that was really the case. I looked back for warning signs leading to this, but other than near breakdown in communication over recent weeks, I couldn't identify anything. There was much to ponder, but right now I had to focus on work. When the Chicago Mercantile Exchange opened the next morning, the Iowa company was trading at $8.49. I cautiously and methodically entered the market. There were many sellers, few buyers, and any large purchase could cause disruption. I had over $30 million to work with. My contacts and Frank's contacts were top-notch, trusting our expertise. God help us all. My first purchase was $5 million from an unknown seller. Then an avalanche of stock hit the market as worried investors hoped to unload and salvage what they could. I suspected it was my old company dumping shares at head office urging. I kept buying in $5 million blocks, expecting the price to stabilize, but it was in freefall despite my purchases. Someone was short-selling stock they didn't own, hoping to buy it back cheaper at day's end. The price continued falling as panicked investors tried to rid themselves of holdings, hoping to get 25 or even 20 cents on the dollar. The price hit $5.61 when I made my last purchase of $15 million. With our $30 million, we'd purchased over 10% of total listed shares. This meant we could appoint someone to the board if we decided to hold rather than sell for profit. I called Frank, and we both drank whiskey over the phone. My choice was 18-year-old Canadian whiskey on the rocks, Frank being old-fashioned poured 10-year-old bourbon. Our purchases encouraged some sideline investors to buy at bargain prices. By the time I logged off, the price had steadily climbed to $8.72. The short sellers were trapped and losing money. I wiped my eyes and looked at the time, almost 2 a.m. After cleaning up quickly, I quietly climbed into bed and passed out. I'd forgotten the melatonin pills in the car. I woke late the next morning. Everyone was downstairs. Tyler and Emma finishing breakfast, Rebecca on the phone. I heard her say something about time being of the essence. When she saw me, she said goodbye and hung up. Work? She shrugged exaggeratedly. She poured me coffee. You must have been up late. I nodded, taking a sip. So did the trading go well? She asked. I mimicked her shrug and left it at that. I poured a second cup and headed to my office. I checked the stock price at close and was pleased to see they'd rallied as market sentiment turned, closing at $10.04. Those holding stock had to be pleased. Short sellers must have been bleeding. Good. It was time to stabilize the stock and start trading to its potential, away from games played by hostile entities. I washed my face and started sending emails and making calls. My first order of business was catching up with our investment group, but I also started researching Brennan Insurance. It was business as usual, vision and mission statements with testimonials from happy sellers and buyers. There was a section about the company's social responsibility program, essentially helping troubled teenagers. They called it New Horizons House, claiming to provide housing, food, training, counseling, and help for troubled teens to find jobs, finish school, get off the street. I couldn't find anything else on their website, so I went to Facebook. I found Richard Brennan's page with lots of pictures of cars, vacations, and people he knew. There was also a recent group photo from a corporate event. The entire Brennan Insurance team was there. Richard stood in the center with his daughter Sophia sitting to his left and Rebecca on his right. Two things stood out. He seemed to have lost significant weight and looked much older, if not haggard. The second thing I noticed was that Rebecca was holding his hand and looking at him instead of at the photographer. It didn't necessarily mean anything. You can read anything into frozen moments, but still. I looked through Rebecca's Facebook pages. Nothing much there except old photos and family posts from what I'd come to think of as better times. Nothing but routine news about work, school, and sporting events. Everything so banal it held no interest. The last picture she'd posted of us together was over 2 years ago. On Sophia's Facebook, there were significant numbers of photos with Rebecca over recent years. Some pictures included Rebecca and Richard together, but nothing objectionable other than the fact they were spending time together. The latest messages were somewhat cryptic about life's meaning and praying for positive results. I had another conversation with Detective Mitchell. "Please call me James, Marcus. I've worked with your father so long I feel like I know you." I told him I wanted to expedite the investigation. He said he'd try, but it all takes as long as it takes. Then I called my father. His advice was to stop drawing unfounded conclusions and theories. Let the experts do their job and give them time, he put it simply. I found myself in a quandary. Should I confront my wife and start fixing what was broken? Wouldn't that lead to more heartache later if I'd been played for a fool? On the other hand, if I did nothing and everything could have been fixed, how hurt would I be if I could have made a difference but didn't? There was a divorce attorney's office in town, and I called. I got through to a staff member who advised it was better to fix marriage than divorce. "There are very rarely winners," she said. "Mostly there are only losers." I had one last card to play. One of Rebecca's former colleagues owed me a small favor after I'd recommended some quality stocks to him. He'd left Brennan Insurance about 6 or 7 months ago, but I decided to extract information from him. He worked for a competing insurance company but was free for late lunch, so we met at Red Robin for burgers and beers. Chad walked in wearing his trademark golf shirt, chinos, and Dockers with sunglasses on his head. If he tried, he couldn't have looked more like an insurance agent. After pleasantries and general chatter while eating, I got down to business. He laughed when my intentions became clear. "So, fishing for information, Marcus?" I nodded. "Why?" "I'm trying to understand something about Brennan Insurance." I limited my explanation. "Something came up that's been bothering me." He turned serious. Everything changed when Richard lost his wife Linda to cancer. He seemed to lose his drive for a long time. Then his daughter became the driving force, and over the next year or so, he seemed to find himself again. He paused and looked at me shrewdly. "Your wife and he became very close. She was sometimes referred to as his office wife." He paused to gauge the effect on me, and I gestured for him to continue, though my throat constricted and I feared if I tried to speak it would come out as a croak. "I didn't see anything inappropriate, but you know how cruel office gossip can be." He scratched his head. "One thing I can say is that Richard, Sophia, and your wife spent a lot of time together. But you weren't home that often, were you?" I shrugged helplessly. We talked about the subject without adding anything new. He was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something. "You do know that Richard was rumored to have been diagnosed with cancer, right?" We said goodbye, but I stayed and called Miami Valley Hospital. I presumptuously asked what room Richard Brennan was in. It turned out he was in a private room in the oncology ward. I paid for lunch and headed home. I had a lot to think about, That evening went much like the previous two, except after cleaning up, I went outside with whiskey and a small cigar. I sipped and puffed while the neighborhood remained quiet. Rebecca came out with a glass of wine. "Can we talk, Marcus?" "Shoot. You went on the Brennan Insurance website," she accused me. Apparently they were more advanced than I'd expected. I guess if they tracked visitor data, they could identify users. "I want to know why. Why did you go to the company website? What did you expect to find? I assume you've also checked everyone's Facebook pages." She glared at me, daring me to say the wrong thing and start an argument. We'd been married long enough for me to recognize those signs. "What did you expect to find?" "Exactly what I found." I made a poker face. "And what was that? Why are you questioning me, Rebecca? I'm not interrogating you. It feels like you're being defensive. Social media pages hardly qualify as private space." I laughed and she blushed. "Sophia said you also went on her Instagram," she accused. "Really?" "Yeah, she's right." She took a deep breath and tried to pull herself together. "Why are you acting like this?" "Like what?" "Right now. Why do you think that, Rebecca?" I looked at her stone-faced and blew smoke in her direction, knowing how much she hated it. She waved her hand, dispersing smoke and spilling wine on her blouse. "Please stop, Marcus." She began to cry. In a normal situation, I would have wrapped her in a hug, but not this time. "Why are you crying, Rebecca?" I looked at her without emotion. "You're upsetting me with your behavior, Marcus," she said louder to get her point across. But I only blew more smoke, creating a small cloud. "Who are you?" I asked her. She tried to formulate an answer but remained voiceless for a while. Finally, she found her voice. "I am your wife, Marcus Thompson. That's who I am." She looked at me defiantly. "I'm not sure." I stepped back as she gasped and ran into the house. I finished my drink and went to my office to work. The Iowa Organic Corn Processing Company's stock was rising strongly, up to $11.92, and it looked like the trend would continue. Frank and I talked it over and agreed this was a trend, not a spike. I stayed online, monitoring market activity. With the exception of blue-chip stocks in a mild uptrend, the rest of the agricultural commodities market was volatile but within expected boundaries. The Iowa company was the only stock showing significant upward movement, though still far from its listing price. We were seeing some profit-taking from those who'd bought low. I texted one of my former Agricor team members, and he admitted they'd managed to dump about half their stock at 50 cents on the dollar, but my former boss Vincent Rodriguez had told him to hold the rest and wait as the trend looked positive. Maybe they could eventually come out ahead. We both laughed a little. He said Agricor might eventually want to rehire me and fire Rodriguez. That night I grabbed a spare blanket and slept on the fold-out couch in my office. The next morning I checked the Chicago Mercantile Exchange closing prices and was pleasantly surprised to see the Iowa company had closed at $13.02. The trend continued as predicted, and our investors had doubled their money. If we managed to reach the predicted $25, we'd have made over 300% profit. I made breakfast and called the kids to eat while drinking coffee. I completely ignored Rebecca all morning, then drove the kids to school. After dropping them off, I headed to the gym and went to IHOP for a very late breakfast. I made some calls, and when I got home, I had a 2-hour meeting with Frank. We talked about starting a combined brokerage company with offices in Dayton and Chicago. We discussed the idea and agreed he'd begin working on structure and equity while I'd develop a market plan. I was drafting the document until late afternoon when I heard Rebecca come in. She was alone. "I left Emma and Tyler at the Beckers for the night," she informed me. "We need to talk." She invited me into the living room, poured me bourbon on the rocks and herself wine. I sat down and waited for her to begin. Usually whoever starts talking first loses, so I sat in silence, sipping my drink until she got agitated and started. "I don't know what you think I've been doing while you've been away, Marcus. I haven't thought about anything yet." "Well, you're being very disrespectful and cruel to me." The woman was right about that. "Is that how you feel?" I raised an eyebrow. "Disrespectful." She started to nod, then realized the hypocrisy and backtracked. "I'm sorry, Marcus. You're not home anymore. We're like two strangers. She snorted with some satisfaction at her description. So after 17 years, we're strangers because I've been gone for 4 months? All the Skypes, all the texts, all the phone calls didn't matter. There was a lot of pressure on me, and you were far away. She wiped tears from her eyes. But you're my husband and I'm your wife, and that's all that matters. She flashed her eyes, daring me to contradict her. She stood up and left. I sat there sipping my bourbon, wondering if this woman had lost her mind. I heard her cell phone ring as she spoke, unable to make out words. Soon all I heard was the murmur of running bathwater. It was some time before she came downstairs. She was wearing a soft gray knit dress ending just above her knees, black shoes, and a single string of pearls I'd bought her in Chicago a few years ago. Go shower and get dressed, she told me. I'll make a reservation at Captain's Table Seafood Restaurant. I was ready in 15 minutes. I could hear she was on the phone with someone again, but I ignored my instinct and bit my tongue. We drove to the restaurant where she started with a gin and tonic in the lounge. Since Rebecca had discovered gin, I deliberately ordered a whiskey sour. Later, when seated in the dining room, she ordered mussels and I ordered half a dozen oysters. We drank Chardonnay and talked about the kids. She didn't seem very concerned about me losing my job. You're one of the smartest people I know, Marcus. I believe you'll find work quickly. She smiled at me. Apparently, she had no idea I was now a pariah in corporate agriculture. Anyway, our savings will help us get by until you get settled. I almost snorted with laughter and concern. She had no idea our entire future now depended on my stubborn unwillingness to admit I was wrong about the Iowa investment. Nevertheless, the evening got better, not worse, as we discussed friends, parents, and the usual everyday topics that are the foundation of any marriage. She asked about some of my former colleagues she'd met at company parties. I shied away from talking about Brennan Insurance until I had more information. Then it was time for main courses. I ordered the captain's platter and she ordered lobster. She treated me to wine, and I drank it, wondering if she was trying to get me drunk. Because if she was, she'd succeeded. The evening passed easily as we relaxed together. I have to say that if she was having an affair or cheating with someone, she did a great job showing me how much she'd missed me. She caressed my hand, looked into my eyes, and was completely attentive. We finished our meal and headed home. The night passed in a way that reminded me of better times between us. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. I pulled on sweatpants and went downstairs. She was making scrambled eggs, bacon, and English muffins, with apple juice on the table and coffee brewing. We ate breakfast together, and she told me about what needed to be done around the house and in the backyard. After that, she got dressed and went to get Tyler and Emma. I was in the backyard, getting ready to start some cleanup after winter, when I noticed my phone ringing. Answering the call, I was humming along to the radio. It was Detective James Mitchell. "Can you talk?" he asked, and my life turned to ice. We arranged a quick meeting at a coffee shop downtown. I left my work unfinished, cleaned up, and drove in. He was waiting and waved when he recognized me. He was nothing like I'd expected based on TV shows and movies. He was a small, unassuming man, no more than 5 feet 7 inches or 5 feet 8 inches, thin, gray-haired, and balding. He wasn't very threatening, but he wasn't one of those stereotypical hard-boiled detectives either. He was wearing dark pants, a shirt, and an old sports jacket. Even his shoes looked like they were bought at Walmart. All in all, he was forgettable. He probably drove a Toyota. However, his high-end smartphone didn't match his outward image, and I smiled inwardly. He'd clearly cultivated this image of an unremarkable nobody. We shook hands, and his firm grip confirmed my impression of who he really was versus the image he was projecting. He cut to the chase without preamble. "Let's not beat around the bush, Mr. Thompson. We didn't catch your wife at a hotel or in any secret meeting." He held up a hand to prevent me from interrupting. "But we have ample evidence that she's been having an affair with her boss, Richard Brennan, for at least 2 years. That seems to be an open secret in the office. Of course, his daughter Sophia knows about it and not only condones it but facilitates it in every way possible. They met regularly during the week, and it seems that when you weren't home, She would often leave the children with friends and essentially move in with him for the weekend. He was methodical and relentless, trying to lay it all out before I exploded or whatever it was I was going to do. His voice began to lose volume as my pulse quickened and drummed in my ears. My hands clutched the table like I was having a heart attack. It's one thing to think your wife is having an affair with another man, and quite another when it's confirmed by a near stranger. James kept talking, but I could barely hear anything. I was burning inside and struggling to pull myself together. Besides, Mr. Brennan has been diagnosed with very aggressive pancreatic cancer and only has a few months to live. What? I tried to process what he'd said. I said that Brennan has been diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer. He's now undergoing treatment for the second time, but it doesn't seem to be working. This confirmed what Chad had said and what I'd discovered, but I didn't know the cancer was terminal and inevitable. I finally understood Rebecca's behavior, her state of mind, everything. She was in pain because she was mourning the man she loved. She was trying to come to terms with his impending death. I told James about Rebecca's behavior and how I thought it all connected. Not because he was my friend, not because he was my confidant, but because he was there in front of me and I just needed someone to talk to. My initial impression of James's hidden depth was confirmed by his next words. Many cheaters try to minimize their actions by saying it was just physical or that it meant nothing. But that's nonsense, Mr. Thompson. He took a sip of his almost cold coffee and grimaced, then looked at me again. Cheaters don't just hook up. They're investing in each other and in the relationship. He frowned as if fishing words from his memory. Women need to feel loved. No one has a long-term relationship based solely on physical attraction. They may start that way, but after a while, feelings emerge love, and it's usually justified by claiming you can love more than one person. He looked up, assessing the effect his words had on me. Cheaters don't spend all their time being physical, Mr. Thompson. They go to restaurants and movies, they take walks and share experiences, they discuss books, politics, and ideas. They develop personal language like spouses do. They share hopes and dreams and invariably lament that their relationship isn't their primary one. He nodded as if agreeing with himself. They typically find faults in their spouse to justify their behavior, then discuss their spouse's real, perceived, or attributed faults with their lover in an attempt to rationalize their immoral activities. I was shocked and devastated. I understood all of that, but honestly, it wouldn't have hurt as much to think they were just having a physical affair. My wife was in a complete relationship with another man who gave her all the same things I did, but without the burdens of raising children, managing household responsibilities, and all the rest. She gave him all her attention. He gave her good times without the daily routine that normal marriage is saturated with, nothing that would turn their time into the less exciting, more routine life that husbands and wives mostly share. We talked some more, then agreed to stop investigating while I considered my next steps. He left, and I was left to sit and ponder what my life now looked like. One thing I knew for sure, my marriage was over. This delusional reasoning about staying together for the sake of the children was beyond me. As unpleasant as the thought of being separated from my children was, the reality was that 60% of children in the U.S. live in separated or divorced families anyway. I guess mine would be no different. I sipped my rapidly cooling coffee. The pain coursing through my insides was real, and at the very least it was going to take its toll on Rebecca and Brennan. I did my best to muffle my emotions. These angry, hurt, anguished, and somewhat irrational thoughts wouldn't help me. I thought back to my work in Iowa, where I'd encountered quite a few old-school executives. They tended to view business and even life in multigenerational terms. They also behaved much like Southern Europeans. When two families went to war, there was and would be no reprieve until one of them was completely destroyed. Easier said than done. I wasn't the head of organized crime or a mafia godfather. I was just an ordinary man living a fairly ordinary life. I didn't have superpowers, nor did I have some omnipotent ally who owed me greatly. The only thing certain was that I was in this alone. I asked for more coffee and pondered, wondering how I was going to get revenge on a dying man. As far as Rebecca was concerned, it was simple. Something she loved and treasured had to be taken from her. In other words, everything she valued in life. Easier said than done, but a plan had already formed in my mind. But first things first, my real and immediate problem was Brennan. I knew he'd made no promises of fidelity to me. He wasn't married to me, Rebecca was married to me. Yet he knew she was married and went after her anyway, thus disrespecting me, my marriage, and my children. Revenge had to be taken. My anger, fueled by pain, began to flare up again. All my early psychological evaluations at work revealed, among other things, two traits that needed to be monitored and managed. First, I was risk-averse, which was certainly a double-edged sword in a company characterized by conservative trading approaches. And second, I was stubborn to the point of becoming intransigent once I chose a position. It was these two traits driving me now. I would retaliate regardless of consequences, and I would not back down until one side was defeated, even if that side was me. The embryo of a plan began to form in my head. I called James and, without going into detail, asked him to find as many troubled women as possible that the Brennans had helped through their program. It wasn't a fully formed plan, mostly just another fishing expedition, but I was hoping to catch big fish. In 2018, I was transferred to our Kansas branch for 3 weeks, and on a free weekend, I joined a local team for some sport fishing on a lake there. I learned valuable lessons. You don't go fishing for bass first. You fish with smaller lures for bluegill and minnows, then use the live bait to catch the bigger fish you're really after. On that trip, I was both successful and reminded that patience in fishing teaches you patience in life. The lesson I learned from that weekend gave me a plan now. I drove home, doing breathing exercises until I regained my composure and could pretend I was in the same mood as before. She still wasn't home, and I went about the business I'd left undone. Later she came back with Tyler and Emma, and we fired up the grill, cooking steaks and corn on the cob with coleslaw and warmed rolls. I spent the day as an active father and dutiful, loving husband. I was two people living in one body, a warm, loving man on the outside and a cynical strategist on the inside. Cynical Marcus decided that since her lover was dying and she feared I might put two and two together, she was trying to do damage control. I was clearly her backup plan. My time with Tyler and Emma was as real as my time with Rebecca was calculated. She genuinely believed it. Cynical Marcus told me to keep that in mind after the divorce when I was looking for women to date. The next few days turned into a strange existence where I was simultaneously living a lie and watching myself play my chosen role. I wondered if movie and television actors have similar experiences watching themselves on screen as characters. On a positive note, Frank and I sorted out the new trading organization, registered it in Illinois, and transferred the entire Iowa portfolio there. But that wasn't the only good news. The Iowa Organic Corn Processing Company was trading at $16.30 after its roller coaster ride and climbing steadily upward. We'd already more than doubled our investment and were looking at a threefold return. Given how easily I'd sunk into my calculating personality, I became paranoid, so I added significant security measures requiring fingerprint and password authentication, plus encryption of all my files and emails. I always turned off my laptop completely and deleted all emails that didn't come from Frank without opening them. Then I'd upload everything I wanted to the cloud, reformat my computer completely, and re-upload what I needed. After that, all that was left was researching other interesting agricultural commodity investments and calling potential investors I knew from AgriCorp, anticipating making offers to buy some of their business. The only thing I wasn't worried about was the non-compete clause, as the layoff made it mostly invalid. My marriage front went quiet while I waited for ammunition to arrive. It arrived on Thursday in the form of a flash drive from James. The handover was done at a different coffee shop than last time because my paranoia was at an all-time high, albeit for no particular reason. He'd made a list of 14 women, everyone he could find. There were brief biographies and some even had old photos attached. 5 still lived in the Dayton area. One of them worked as an escort, a prostitute to be exact, so Brennan's intervention hadn't helped her much. She had a phone number. I went and bought a prepaid cell phone, then called her. We arranged to meet at a motel on the outskirts of town. She said an hour was $100 and I'd have to pay for the room. She arrived on time at 2 p.m. She was small, thin, and heavily tattooed. Her name was Crystal and she stood in the doorway. "Show me the money," were her first words. I pulled $200 from my pocket, placed the bills on the bed, and gestured for her to sit down. I raised my hand to stop her from undressing. "How do you feel about making 1,000?" I asked, but she jumped up, grabbing her bag. "I don't do weird stuff, mister." "No," I assured her. "I'll pay for information." "What kind?" "I want to know about the home for troubled women you were in a few years ago." She wasn't sure, but after some thought, she agreed and told her story briefly. She said she'd left home as soon as she graduated high school because she hated her stepfather and ended up on the streets. Eventually, having lost all hope, she began selling herself for food and shelter. One client, when she didn't want to do what he wanted, threw her out like trash. She was found by passers-by who called police. They took her to the hospital, and someone contacted Mrs. Brennan, who offered her a place in the house once she was discharged. She stayed there almost 6 months, she said, until the rules and regulations bored her and she left. She finished her story, and we looked at each other in silence for a while. Her story was typical, though no less tragic. I wondered if what I was about to do would be another tragedy, but the need for revenge took over everything else. "So when you lived in this house, were you harassed right away, or did it start later?" She blinked rapidly, trying to comprehend my question. She started to shake her head no, then froze. I could see the gears turning in her head. "How much?" she asked. "I was thinking $5,000. I began to negotiate. "Why?" She thought about it for a few minutes. She may have been an uneducated prostitute, but her negotiating skills were good enough for any corporate boardroom. "Brennan ruined my marriage, and I want to destroy him." I looked at her for signs of hesitation, whether she'd do it for money or for some greater good. 20,000. She smiled grimly, watching me like a hawk to gauge my reaction. I hesitated, figuring out how plausible she could be. She smirked, looking at me. "What? I can see you wondering whether spending 20 grand on a nobody will help your cause." Damn, this young tattooed woman was sharp. She leaned toward me and we ended up nose to nose. "Give me 25, and I'll show you the power of the #MeToo movement in action." I told her we had to plan it out and arrange how the money would be transferred. She told me she wanted the money so she could get a fresh start elsewhere since she had a little girl and needed to get out of the business. I offered honestly that if it worked out, I'd set her up with a job in Chicago, and her eyes lit up. "For real?" "For real? You're not just tricking me to get what you want." She looked both hopeful and scared at the same time, like a child about to reach for candy, but knowing it could be taken away. I managed to reassure her that everything was legitimate. We agreed she'd do what she'd promised, and we'd meet to discuss next steps as soon as she was ready. We exchanged numbers. I gave her my prepaid phone number and asked her to save it under Jerry. Phase 1 was complete. At home, I continued my dichotomy of inside and outside, and Rebecca seemed to keep buying into it. To be fair, she was focused on the New Horizons project and didn't notice much else. I gathered as much information as I could without making her suspicious about how far the project had progressed. We cooked and ate together like old times. During breakfast, she said she'd be busy helping set up New Horizons House, and there would be a grand opening on Monday at 10 a.m. I already knew about it from the company website and social media. I feigned interest and, without appearing too curious, questioned her. Turns out they were planning to have the mayor and his entourage cut the ribbon. A bunch of local media was supposed to be there, as well as the local TV station. Did they stop the chemo and radiation so Richard could feel well enough to attend? I heard her ask, probably Sophia. I didn't hear an answer. "It's going to be a life-changing moment," she said, sobbing slightly. "Not if I had anything to do with it." Time to turn up the heat. My divorce papers were ready. All that remained was getting permission to file them. Ohio was a no-fault state, and there were no laws allowing me to sue Brennan for alienation of affection either, so it was a matter of irreconcilable differences. I started Friday by checking the agricultural futures markets. Our Iowa stock had reached its issue price and was rising, albeit in small increments. A good start to the day. I had coffee and tuned into WHIO radio at 9:30. There was an interview with Sophia. She was talking about the wonderful social responsibility program that Brennan Insurance and her father Richard had been pursuing. It was heartwarming stuff. She explained that New Horizons House was simply an ongoing evolution of a program her mother had started, and after her mother's death, her father had continued it. Now there was an opportunity to turn it into a full-fledged project with proper funding, but obviously it would work better with community participation and donations. The host spoke enthusiastically about the project's value, then asked listeners for their opinions. Listeners spoke favorably, and some promised to donate. The presenter promised to put donation information on the WHIO website, and Sophia said there were details on the Brennan Insurance website and New Horizons website. More calls in the same vein followed until, "Hello!" The voice on the other end was hesitant. She was urged to speak louder, and between a broken voice and quiet sobs, she managed to raise her voice. Please don't believe that house helped anyone," she managed to croak out. "All it did was allow Mr. Brennan to abuse women." She burst into tears over the phone. Sophia went into an apoplectic fit. "Never. This never happened. My father is a good man. He would never do anything like this." The caller was still on the line. "He did, and more than once." Her voice rose with justifiable indignation and anger. "Do you know what I am now?" she shouted in a breaking voice. I work the streets. That's all I'm worth thanks to your precious daddy." Her pain was unbearable. "My name is Crystal, and your father ruined me," she sobbed, and the connection cut off. The station went to commercial break. When they returned, the host was torn between his original interview and addressing the elephant that filled the airwaves. Sophia was stunned by this turn of events and tried to explain that it was nonsense and that her father was a good man who would never do anything like that. It was obvious she believed that, but then again, we all want to believe the best about our parents. All the lines were ringing with people both supporting and condemning Crystal. One caller said, "What you'd expect. What do you expect from a prostitute? She's clearly trying to make money." Some wanted to ask questions of Sophia, while others suggested that authorities should intervene. The talk show host was no fool. It had turned from a little low-interest story into an emotional maelstrom, with listeners adding their opinions on what was real and what wasn't. The furor reached its climax when a well-modulated voice came on the air. "My name is Rita. I don't want to give my last name on the air." Her voice was shaky but determined. "But I left it with your producer so I can be contacted." She took a shuddering breath. "Richard Brennan abused me too." And the floodgates opened. Within minutes, the phone lines were jammed with callers sharing their own stories or defending Brennan. The story jumped to other local radio stations as people called in to discuss what was happening on WHIO. A short time later, a woman called in. She spoke in a thin, frightened voice. "I'm a married woman with children," she cried. "I had hoped to put all this behind me, but Mr. Brennan harassed me too." She broke down and sobbed on air. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I promised I wouldn't say anything, but I can't live with this anymore. I was young and I needed help, and he made me." She couldn't finish. Couldn't say no. "I didn't know how." She disconnected. There was long silence before the host could say anything. It sounded like he was crying. I called Vicky, an old high school friend who worked at the local newspaper and anchored news for 2 regional radio stations. I asked if she'd heard about what was happening on WHIO and other stations. She had. I told her I was concerned because my wife worked for Brennan Insurance in the New Horizons project. I asked her opinion. She wasn't sure but was going to look into the matter. She said if it was true, it would be the biggest abuse case in Dayton in 2 generations. By lunchtime, the story had gone quiet on the air. None of the radio hosts wanted to offer opinions. However, social media and Twitter in particular went wild. At first, opinions were split 50-50 for and against, but within hours it turned into a fierce witch hunt. Hundreds and then thousands of women took to the platforms to tell their stories of abuse from various sources. Some were detailed. Others were nothing more than admissions of #MeToo. Some were so graphic they could be categorized as X-rated. Within hours, it was impossible to distinguish truth from fiction. The information went viral and spread not only across states but entire continents. I collapsed with a massive headache. I reached for the Tylenol. The day was early, and the kids were still in school. From the stress and emotions I'd experienced, I was sweating and feeling dirty. I undressed in the laundry room, walked to the shower, and collapsed under a stream of warm water. I sat down and cried like I hadn't cried since my mom died. In fact, I cried harder. Losing my mom was a knife to my heart, but this was a knife to my soul. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Nietzsche's saying that he who fights monsters must be careful not to become a monster himself accurately described me. Brennan had done bad things to me, but I had unleashed a firestorm that had already lost control. All I could do now was hang on and pray. I picked up Tyler and Emma and drove home to make chicken stir-fry with noodles and a small Asian salad on the side. We waited for Rebecca, but she didn't come. I tried to call her, but her phone was off. We finally ate, and I put a plate of food for Rebecca in the microwave and a small bowl of salad in the refrigerator. Tyler, Emma, and I sat down to play Monopoly, and Rebecca was still gone by 10 p.m. The kids had gone to their bedrooms, and I was alone in the living room when she came in. She looked like she'd just been through hell. The shadows under her eyes were dark. Her hair was a mess, and she had the aura of a woman whose world had just crumbled. "You heard?" She sighed with a shudder. "Have you heard all the nasty things they're saying about Richard?" She groaned, collapsing into a chair. I handed her a large brandy, which she gratefully accepted, drinking half of it in one gulp. "Yeah, sounds like your boss is a predator," I told her in an even, emotionless voice. "Where there's smoke, there's fire. No, Marcus. He's a good man. He would never do anything like this. Time to move to phase 2. Rebecca," she looked up from her brandy, "you obviously didn't know the man very well." "You don't know." I turned the screws. "You and I have no secrets. We're husband and wife, so you know what I'm capable of, just like I know you." I held her gaze. "You may know Brennan as your boss, but who knows what he's really like?" I watched conflicting thoughts and emotions play across her face. No, he's a good man. He would never do anything like that." "I would know." I threw her a helplessly confused look. "But how, Rebecca? How do you know? I mean, he's your boss, your coworker. He could be hiding a million secrets. I haven't interacted with him that much, but I always felt like he was hiding something. He's the kind of guy you wouldn't leave alone with your wife or daughters." She sighed. Has he ever tried anything with you?" She turned white, and I pretended not to notice. No, never. How can you even ask that?" She tried to snap at me but ended up just looking dumbfounded. "Because you're a beautiful woman, Rebecca, and if what they say about him is true, he must be very immoral." She burst into tears and looked deeply into her glass of brandy but found no answers there either. She finished it and headed upstairs tiredly. She said hello to Tyler and Emma, said goodnight, and then I heard the shower running. I finished my cognac and headed to bed. By the time she got out of the shower, I pretended to be half asleep. She came downstairs in her robe. I climbed out of bed and made my way to the landing. She was talking to someone. From the sound of it, probably Sophia. She repeated nightmare several times, then asked, "But why? Why isn't there more than one woman saying she was attacked?" Finally, she said she didn't think it would go away easily. How right she was. She made a second call. "Hi, Richard," I heard her say. I caught snippets of phrases where she kept telling him that everything would be resolved and it was some big misunderstanding. I barely heard her move to the kitchen, but I caught her last words, "I love you too." I heard the microwave beep, and she spent some time alone, probably eating. By the time she got to bed, I was asleep. The trap was set. Now I had to wait and see if Brennan would walk into it. Saturday I woke up first, made breakfast, then drove Tyler and Emma to sports practice. When I got home, I was on the phone with Vicky. She informed me that another woman had come forward, making for so far. She also told me that her sources in the mayor's office said the entire project was now considered toxic and they were distancing themselves from it. A number of civic associations soon followed with similar denials. By mid-morning, The Attorney General's office had issued a statement that they would conduct a full investigation into the matter. By the time I got back, the agricultural markets were closed for the weekend, so there was nothing to do. I talked to Frank about business and to my father about the state of my marriage. He agreed it was irretrievably broken. He said he felt sorry for Tyler and Emma, but like the rest of the kids in the U.S., they'd learn to cope. I called Rebecca. "Where are you? Sophia and I and the company lawyers are trying to fight these nasty accusations. Are you sure you should get involved?" I colored my voice with concern. The spillover could be significant, and you don't want to be caught in it. She resisted, as I knew she would, but all their legal efforts went nowhere. On Saturday afternoon and Sunday, which were the busiest days for insurance consultations, Brennan Insurance had less than 20% of its previous client traffic. By Monday morning, the phones were ringing off the hook with canceled policies and withdrawn business. The opening of New Horizons House was postponed indefinitely until the negative publicity was over. That Monday, another woman made herself known in an unusual way. This woman was married to a wealthy businessman and was well known in the community. According to her statement, she'd spent a total of 8 days in the house before giving her name and having her parents contacted. During that time, the man she knew as Mr. Brennan had taken advantage of her twice. She left her lawyer's details for all the women who'd been assaulted by Brennan to contact him so they could file a class action lawsuit. By the end of that week, 5 things had happened. First, Brennan was interviewed by the district attorney at the hospital, after which his condition deteriorated significantly. Second, 3 of the 5 women came to police and gave testimony. All claimed to have been assaulted. Interestingly, all the assaults had occurred within a short period about 5 years ago. Third, the media storm escalated to the point where Brennan Insurance closed its doors until further notice. Rebecca naively told me every night about how Sophia was trying to keep the business going while vendors were leaving and taking customers with them. Fourth, the Iowa Organic Corn Processing Company had passed the $24 mark, and I was slowly selling blocks of shares, which were quickly bought up without lowering the price. We'd made back our original investment and still owned 2/3 of the stock. To put it bluntly, we were sitting pretty. My dad took Tyler and Emma for the weekend. I was on my way back from a small liquor store where I'd bought a chilled bottle of 2016 Veuve Clicquot. I was ready to celebrate. Fifth, and this was the big one, I noticed a BMW X5 SUV with Brennan Insurance logos on the doors parked in my driveway next to Rebecca's Lexus. I stopped and walked into the house. They were in the living room. Rebecca was crying, and Sophia was stroking her back, generally comforting her. "Ladies," I saluted them, walked over to the cabinet where we kept crystal, and pulled out 3 champagne flutes. They stared at me dumbfounded with open mouths as I tore off the foil, twisted the wire cage, and popped the cork with flourish. I filled 3 glasses generously and handed each one a glass. They were both in a sort of stupor, as if their brains had tilted, and accepted the offered glasses. "Cheers!" I raised my toast, drank half of mine, and burped. Then the shouting began. "You're divorcing me?" Rebecca noticed an open envelope with divorce papers lying on the coffee table. "I thought we were a family. How could you, Marcus?" Sophia exclaimed. "Don't you care about your wife? Don't you love her? Have a drink, Rebecca. We're celebrating the end of an era." I finished the rest of my champagne and reached for the bottle. "Hello, Sophia. First of all, I could and I did. Second, I stopped caring about her and stopped loving her when she became your father's lover." I knocked back my glass and saluted Sophia. "Let's drink to your father's legacy, Sophia. I hope he lives long enough to stand trial, and then the whole world will know what a piece of garbage he really is." She turned white and collapsed back into her chair. I turned to Rebecca. "Get yourself a lawyer." I smirked at her. "The kids will stay with my father until custody is established." Her eyes widened with fear. This was like nothing she'd ever seen from me before. It looked like I'd turned into the very monster I'd feared becoming. Sophia dropped her flute on the carpet, making a mess. They looked at me the way one looks at a madman with his finger on the trigger. "So, no champagne?" I laughed humorlessly. "You left me alone for so long and so often. I needed human contact. Rebecca tried to justify herself but couldn't meet my gaze. I understand. I laughed bitterly. And how do you manage that now? But then Sophia came at me again. And how many women did you sleep with while you were away from home? You men all want your women to be angels when you're away, and you do whatever you want. Don't think all men act like the piece of trash who fathered you. Just because he was happy to prey on young women and ruin marriages doesn't mean the rest of us stoop to his depravity. I stared at her, hoping she would object or even attack me physically. I leaned into her face. Your father is a predator, a criminal, a disgusting pig. He'll probably die before he goes to prison, but you, my wife, and the world will recognize him for what he is. His legacy project will never happen, and his money will be frozen by the courts for future lawsuits by his victims. Brennan Insurance will file for bankruptcy and cease to exist, and you'll have to move far away and change your name. She trembled and cried at my verbal assault. I bet she wished she were a man so she could hit me. I wished she were a man too, so I could unleash the rage I'd so carefully contained for weeks. In fact, it seems to me, Sophia, that you probably helped lure these girls the way Ghislaine Maxwell did for Jeffrey Epstein. Her mouth worked wordlessly at the horror I was spouting. I think I need to contact the news media to let them know about you. She shook her head side to side, her eyes widening with fear and horror. No, please. I didn't do this. It's all a lie. Some kind of mistake. I don't know what these women are trying to accomplish, but it's not true. My father is a good man. I turned to Rebecca. You have 2 hours to gather your clothes and leave. When I return, if you're still here, I'll call the press and make a statement. Moreover, I'll invite them to interview you about your involvement in this horrible situation. Screw you, she spat at me. I have nothing to apologize for. Well, except for cheating and lying. I'll move out, but I'll hire a lawyer first thing, and then we'll see who gets what. Oh God, Rebecca, you found some strength. 2 hours. I reminded her. I got out and headed for the car, but had only gone a few blocks when all the unused adrenaline in my body caught up with me. I gasped and shook uncontrollably. This went on for about 15 minutes before I got my body under control and was able to drive on. For a while, I drove aimlessly around Dayton. Eventually, I pulled myself together and called my father. I told him about Rebecca receiving the papers and reiterated that he should keep Tyler and Emma with him until further notice. While he should allow Rebecca to visit them, under no circumstances should she be left alone with them to turn them against me. We talked, and I drove until the car indicated I was low on fuel. I found a gas station, filled up, and headed home, marveling at how far I'd driven around the city. By the time I got back, it was 10 p.m. The house was like a mausoleum filled with ghosts of happy times. The silence was noisy in my ears, and I couldn't sleep. 2,500 years ago, Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and I lay in bed trying hard not to examine myself or look too deeply into my psyche because of the fury I'd unleashed for revenge. The only thing I knew for sure was that things had gone too far, and there was no stopping them. I was afraid that what was happening on social media was one thing, but if it went to court, things could unravel. Would I find myself implicated? I felt the need to get Crystal out of town to at least eliminate my direct connection to the issue. Having decided this, I managed to sink into a half-slumber. I woke up the next morning feeling almost as tired as when I'd climbed into bed. After my morning routine, I headed downtown for breakfast. I called the kids. They were doing well, but Tyler already suspected all was not well at home. I promised I'd talk to him and Emma soon. Over coffee, I reached Crystal on the prepaid phone. So did I do as well as I promised? I admitted she had. We talked and confirmed she was flying to Chicago the next day. I'd already transferred money from my offshore trading account to one of Frank's offshore accounts. Then he'd transferred smaller amounts to a bank account she'd opened. Crystal was $25,000 richer and off to a job as a property management assistant, organized by one of Frank's investment contacts who owned commercial properties. I was drinking my second cup of coffee when Vicky called. 3 women have sued Brennan seeking damages, she informed me. Papers will be served Monday. We talked for a while. She said she and the news editors were surprised by the timing and how the whole story had unfolded, but she reasoned it wasn't surprising in the current climate. Once the first woman, Crystal, who claimed she was working as a prostitute, got publicity, the rest followed, as in the Harvey Weinstein case. I spent the rest of Saturday with Tyler and Emma. I told them their mom and I would be getting divorced because she was having an affair with her boss, Richard Brennan. Emma didn't quite understand what an affair was. Tyler understood. She slept with Mr. Brennan, Dad? I nodded sadly. Yeah, they've been involved for a while now. Emma was crying. Tyler was unfazed. We packed up and, taking my dad with us, went to the driving range and hit a few buckets of balls. Tyler and Emma used some of my old clubs and both had good natural swings. After that, we went to a Greek restaurant for dinner and eventually headed home. I went back to my quiet mausoleum and had another sleepless night. On Sunday, I got a call from Rebecca's parents. They wanted to know if there was any hope of reconciliation for the sake of the children. How can I reconcile with a woman who's been having an affair with her boss for years? I asked. And that boss happens to be a predator. Rebecca may have even been complicit. There was collective silence. Living in Arizona had insulated them from the storm that had hit Ohio. It will all be figured out in court, I assured them, and ended the call, leaving them with a shattered view of their daughter. Life went on, mostly slowly and painfully. Tyler and Emma moved back home, and my father moved in to help out. This essentially left me with a business that was gaining momentum as Frank and I were getting positive feedback. At the end of the second week, the hype around Brennan had died down somewhat. Vicky informed me that a fourth woman had joined the class action lawsuit, but not Crystal. I thought that was odd. She was opportunistic enough, and it seemed she'd want her piece of the settlement. Oh well, that was a mystery for another day. I had meetings between Rebecca's lawyers and mine about property division. I'd set up education investment accounts for Tyler and Emma from our combined cash assets, so they couldn't be touched. My last paycheck and payments from Agricor went directly into my offshore account, and her lawyers were still trying to get documents from my previous employer. While they suspected some sort of golden parachute, they had no idea how much. But it was only a matter of time before they subpoenaed HR documents. I offered to pay her nothing, as she had a job and was generally making good money. She argued there should have been at least $250,000 in cash and near-cash assets. I assured them it had been lost on unprofitable stock investments. Both Rebecca and her lawyer scoffed, but I laughed. Take the deal, Rebecca, or I'll fight you until you run out of money for lawyers. I'll ruin you financially. Why? Why are you being such an ass? She looked at me. I deserve half of whatever's left from our marriage. Go to your boyfriend and ask him for money, Rebecca. It sounds like you had more of a marriage with him than you did with me. But you'd better hurry. He may not have any money left after those poor assaulted women get what he owes them. I wish I could say it was all over after that. But it wasn't. Not at all. It dragged on for months, but most of the cards were in my hands, and righteous anger kept me going. She wavered from meeting to meeting. At one, she was saying I made the whole relationship between her and Brennan look much more serious than it really was. At the next meeting, she blamed me for her behavior. Then she wanted to know why we had to get divorced and couldn't work it out. The next time, I heard from her lawyer that she was going to take me to the cleaners. At another meeting where I refused to give in, her lawyer said he'd get her back in the house immediately. I gave her my biggest grin. You better be careful around me, Rebecca, or I'll go to every possible media outlet to expose your complicity in this. She went white and turned gray like a heart attack victim. Try it and see what happens to you next. As I left the lawyer's office, I noticed Sophia sitting in the lobby. She was glaring at me angrily. I smiled at her the way one smiles at the walking dead, and her expression faltered and faded. You should have stayed out of this, Sophia. Well, you reap what you sow. 2 days later, Crystal was another $5,000 richer, and the local newspapers, Twitter, and social media were ablaze with the latest revelation that Sophia Brennan had been helping her disgraced father Richard. The DA's office came under fire for not arresting Brennan or taking action against his daughter. The DA's office held a media briefing stating they were still in early stages of investigation. The press didn't hold back, and another storm erupted. The public was still reeling from the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein story, and soon the bloodlust was targeting Sophia Brennan as well. Brennan was sued by 4 highly publicized women. I became seriously concerned and began having sleepless nights. Going to court was a huge risk for me and could easily have derailed the whole case. It was the 6th week since my return from Iowa. I was working from home as usual when the doorbell rang. It was Sophia. "What do you need?" I wasn't going to pretend civility. "Can we talk, Marcus?" "No. I don't want to be associated with a predator like you." I glared at her and started to close the door, leaving her standing outside. She rang again, just as I knew she would. "Please, Marcus, just talk," she begged. I felt like laughing out loud. Where was her entitlement now? "I don't think so. You just want to record me and try to get me to say something you can use for your own purposes." "I won't, I promise." Her eyes lit up, but I held out my hand, stopping her. "Good. But first put your purse and phone in the car. Wait here." I closed the door, discreetly set my phone to record, then opened it again. "Okay, talk." I let her in and motioned to the nearest couch. She looked unsure whether to stand or sit, but I gestured for her to sit across from me. She sat on the edge as if she might bolt at any minute. She brushed loose hair from her face and pulled herself together. "I know it's you, Marcus. You're the one who created this whole nightmare." I just stared at her without emotion. She probably thought I was a serpent in her Garden of Eden. "Stop it. Stop it now, Marcus." I sat there looking at her in silence, and she changed tactics. "I know you were hurt by Rebecca's affair with my father. Anyone would be hurt, but this nonsense about my father abusing women is a lie, and it needs to stop. It needs to be disproven." I laughed in her face. "There's nothing I can do, Sophia. It's up to the courts now. Please, Marcus, please make it stop. I know you can." I smiled unhappily. "Now that your world has collapsed, you want me to help you? Where were you when your father was entertaining my wife?" Her face turned red again. "Oh yes, you were helping. Making sure she felt comfortable being your father's mistress." We stared at each other in silence for a long time. I read her face as she considered and rejected arguments to change my mind. Finally, she said, "What will it take, Marcus? What will satisfy you?" Her eyes grew cloudy. Then tears rolled down her face as she visibly shuddered. This was no pretense. This was a woman defeated. "Not until your family is completely destroyed, Sophia." She shuddered, her eyes widening in horror. "There will be no stopping. There will be no ceasefire. There will be no peace." I spoke slowly and purposefully. I wanted her to realize this wasn't a game she could back down from. This was real. She grasped the truth and fell silent as she thought about what I'd said. Then she surprised me by coming back for another try. "You want revenge, Marcus? How much? How much?" She clasped her hands together and stared at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. She was in her early 30s, unmarried, and had no children. Her Facebook pages indicated she'd recently broken up with her last partner, so she was single. Staggering. She reached the door and on unsteady legs ran to her BMW. I watched her drive erratically down the street. I had conflicting feelings, satisfaction at having caused her pain and letting her know more would follow, but at the same time, disgust at my ability to be so callous and cruel to another person's feelings. It was still early, but I wanted a drink, and maybe more than one. I spent the rest of the week in and out of law offices. In between, I continued working on getting new clients. There was a listing on the Chicago Board of Trade for a small agricultural technology company that looked promising, and a listing on the NASDAQ for a renewable energy company with wind farms in Kansas and Iowa. Frank and I were completing due diligence before presenting them to our investor group. The 4 women's class action lawsuit against Brennan was in full swing. The Brennans, led by Sophia and their attorneys, were trying to mitigate the situation and reach an out-of-court settlement. The district attorney still couldn't make up his mind how to prosecute a man on his deathbed. So everyone waited. I heard the Brennans had been cleaned out of almost every penny. All real estate owned by the company was sold, and the women got over $2 million each. The amount wasn't disclosed publicly, but it was substantial. It was effectively the end of Brennan Insurance. I needed one more thing to complete my revenge. So I went to Miami Valley Hospital and entered Brennan's room, looking official and walking as if I belonged there. No one challenged me. I was there to make sure he knew who had ruined him, his legacy, and his whole life. He was barely conscious, but his eyes focused on me when I approached his bed. "Hello, Richard," I said quietly. "Do you know who I am?" He nodded weakly. "Good. I want you to know that I know about you and my wife. I want you to know that I'm the one who destroyed everything you spent your life building." His eyes widened slightly. "But here's the thing, Richard, and this is important. I thought I was making it all up. I thought I was creating lies to destroy you for stealing my wife." I leaned closer. "But you really did abuse those women, didn't you?" He tried to speak but could only whisper. You ruined everything I worked for." I laughed harshly. "It's your own fault, Brennan. I destroyed you completely. How did you find out about me using them?" There was a long silence while I tried to comprehend what he'd said. Then I started laughing and couldn't stop. I dropped my phone on his bedside table, then finally got my laughter under control. "I didn't know, Brennan. I thought I was making it all up. But now I realize why those 4 women pursued you the way they did. All it took was one little crack in your facade, and then it all came pouring out." "Screw you, Thompson," he wheezed, panting. "Those women owed me." He tried to sit up to show he still had some fight left. I walked away. He died 2 days later. 6 months later, the women's shelter opened in the same building Brennan had planned for his legacy project. Sometimes the best revenge is letting the truth speak for itself. Thank you for watching. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.